Hi, and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and we're starting a new series digging deeper into deer science in a much more nuanced way than last season. In this episode, we're looking at specific applications of deer vision and just how to beat it. How you may want to start hunting differently because of what the science really means for us hunters. I'm joined again by my friend Mark for this in-depth discussion. And here are the top things to look for during this high IQ episode about how to beat the vision of a whitetail deer. What are the ways a whitetail sees very differently than a human? What does this mean about our critical choices for camouflage? And how did we go backward in the camo boom of the 1990s? What type of headlight do I strongly suggest for coming and going in the dark? And what is the rock-solid science behind my suggestion? What do Mark and I both suggest for not getting busted while moving on stand? And what does this have to do with a deer's unique ability to process visual data? And there's a ton more in there as usual, so let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. All right, welcome back, Mark, to the podcast. It's been a while, so I appreciate you coming in to just talk about some stuff that in this new series, going back over deer science, because this is something that a lot of people found really interesting last year. And so I wanted to dig back into maybe some more applications of it. But if you don't know Mark, he joined us a bit last year and is a friend of mine. And we're just going to have a discussion about, in this series, just some of the deer science stuff. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to Mark to go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I was one of those guys who found the podcast that you did with Dr. Carl Miller really, really interesting, and certainly think it's worth diving back into. He approached it from the science a lot, right, of just being, research-based. What do we know factually? Right. But as you talk about what does that mean for hunters, right, we're approaching this from a hunting standpoint, and how can we improve ourselves? Just as much as we can extrapolate from that data into what does that mean for us as hunters, how can we maximize our opportunities to chase these awesome creatures and,
Yeah, and really maximizing that. So what does this really mean? We did get into it some in those talks, but trying to take it a step further. Because sometimes it's like, that's really cool, but how do I use that?
Right.
Or how can I really apply this? So I thought we'd start, and you can always go back and listen to those episodes. There was one on vision, which is what we're going to talk about in this podcast, but there's one on hearing as well. And I'll link those in this in the show notes, but I'll just recap real quick. So I have some notes up here just to help visually a little bit. But this is based off science. So we know deer can see about 18 times better than we can as far as the light that they can intake in their eyeball, right? That's due to the shape of it and also the reflective nature of their eye. They have this tapetum, which we've probably all seen, the reflective, shiny part of their eye, right, if we ever shine lights in their eyes. And so that makes it go over the retina a second time. So that gets them up to 18 times better, basically collection of light, which if you think about it, it's hard to imagine. And, one of the examples was, well, if you're driving down the road and the deer in the headlights, is even a saying, right? They just kind of stand there. Well, it's because that's 18 times brighter to them than us. So that's part of it. There's also this, they can see, and this is just comparing it to humans, right? They see 300 degrees, so almost all the way around, and they see equally well in that. But it's fuzzy compared to our sight. So we focus on things and cannot see over here very good. They don't focus on things but can see everything pretty well, right? But that has application to it. Also, the color part of their eye, like their cones, which detect color, they only have blue and yellow. And so that limits their color ability to see color. And we have RGB, red, green, and blue cones, and that lets us see the whole spectrum of the rainbow. They can't see the whole spectrum. So that has implication and application too. And then at low light, And I have a blog if you want to read this and see some of these charts. Like I made a chart here I'll reference. It's just me drawing, right? But you can actually see some of those charts in that blog I'll link. But they also have, we have a UV filter that keeps UV light out, which is good for us in most cases, but it also, they don't have one, so they can see much better at the blue and ultraviolet end of the spectrum. So that's kind of the science background, and now we can get into what does that mean?
And another thing that I think might be underestimated too is like the way their eye moves is actually, so one, they have like a horizontal slit, right? So they can see the horizon much better. And when they tilt their head down, their world doesn't shift like ours does. Like if we tilt our head, it actually shifts. Their eyeball rotates. So if this is their like pupil, when they're up, it's still horizontal, and when they tip their head down, they're still seeing the world in the exact same, basically plane. Yeah, I mean, so naturally, my first instinct would go to, okay, vision means sight, so I'm trying to hide from a deer's vision, so camo is really important, right? And pattern, and I mean, for decades, like I remember growing up in the 90s when it was all like the cutting edge, the biggest prep to deer season is like, what new camo pattern is out, and look at how detailed it is. But now we know that it's actually not really that important in terms of like, is it a maple leaf or an oak leaf? A deer does not care. And that actually might hurt some of that like distinctive. So what can we do in terms of like pattern camouflage to maximize our efficiency against a deer's eye?
Right. And so this is where it gets into, we thought we were moving forward in the 90s, as you mentioned, where we actually moved backward, because turns out, and a lot of people argue this, so-and-so was able to shoot deer in their plaid, right? The old plaid coats.
The old plaid coat.
It's because that breaks up your form, which is really all you need to do. The deer can't see, as we said, they see 300. They see a broad range, but they don't see in detail. They see kind of fuzzy compared to us. And so all you got to do is break up your form. And so all that detail really doesn't do anything. It's all about having a pattern that can break up your form. And I think now what we're seeing, and this is just recently, is a lot of camo patterns are just more open. They're more big and blotchy.
Like exactly.
Kind of like this pattern here, which is just a Cabela's, I think it's called Outfitter.
Generic contrast and some generic colors.
Yeah, the generic colors. So the old plaids actually did that fairly well. It didn't have to exactly match the exact environment, right? And so finding patterns that do that and are pretty open. And I think one thing you can do, this is kind of maybe a hack, you might call it, is if you look at a pattern and kind of squint your eyes so it's just like a little bit fuzzy to you, that might, kind of give you an idea of how a deer might see that. And if it is blobbing up as one color, then it's probably not doing too much for you, right? And so I see a lot of these patterns out there, and I'm planning on doing an episode in the future where I break down some patterns and just give an honest opinion on them based on this. But if you see patterns that, when you do that, you don't see much distinction in color, to a deer, it probably looks like just one blob of color. It's probably not doing too much for you. You might as well wear just a brown coat and some brown pants or something. Because a lot of those older patterns, they do that, what they call blobbing up, and it just looks like a big color. And so just the bigger, more open patterns like this that just have different colors do a better job, I think. So I think that's the science to take out of that just generally.
So the old plaid and blue jeans, why might you not want blue jeans, though? Because now that we know essentially how their eyes can interpret color and what colors that they see better than others, blue jeans are probably not a good choice if you're going to go with the plaid.
Right, because they're designed to see blue best. So they see blue and ultraviolet the best. We can't see ultraviolet. They can see ultraviolet. And they see blue the best, and even in those low light conditions, they see that even better because that's where the ambient light is the brightest. So like right at dusk, the blues are more prevalent, and they can see that really well. So that helps them with night vision. And they don't have that UV filter that we do. So that really pops out as, and Carl was talking about it, white is going to look blue to them in those low light conditions, and it's just like glowing. So that's why you wouldn't want to wear blue jeans, or even in camo, if it has blue, and I don't know much that has blue, but blue and white are going to be very bright to a deer. And so, if you're in snow and have a snow pattern, great, because there's white around you as well. Or if you're sticking out in a tree and the sky's the background, okay, some of that might kind of blend in, but the blue is just going to kind of glow to them. And you got to be careful about the whites too. Really, what is that blending into your background that would look normal, I guess.
Right. If you're trying to be a tree, you don't want to stick out like the sun or snow or something like that.
Yeah, and the sky is one thing, and this is something to think about too, and we can kind of move on here. But if your pattern is just looking like the bark of a tree, I guess the question is how many times would a deer look at you and you're exactly against the back of a tree? Like if you're in a tree stand or something, you're probably not just lined up with the tree a lot of the time. You're lined up with part of the sky.
Yep.
And so that's another reason why if it's just that one barky looking color, it's probably not that good as far as breaking up your form. And honestly, this pattern here, and I have no affiliation with the Cabela's at all, but I love this pattern because, and we can get into some examples. So I hunt a lot of public land in Michigan, and I hunt some areas where it's hard to get in trees, like bedding areas that have a lot of undercover, but then just like trees that are kind of like telephone poles, So you get up in one of those, like you're blending into the tree a little bit, but the sky a lot, right? And so I've been up in those trees with the high detail defined stuff, and deer will pick you off because you are this blob up in the tree. Where stuff like this is much more open, I've had much more success. They just don't pick you off. And so, yeah, just looking for camo patterns like that. Again, if you squint your eyes and you can't see any difference in contrast or anything, you might want to stay away from it. So.
Yeah, and we know there's no perfect camouflage because we can't fully, we know the science of deer eyes, but we can't actually put ourselves behind those eyes, right? So I think camo's gotten a lot better. Camo has improved, but basically what we know is like stick to generics. Staying away from whites is probably a good thing, certainly blues. I guess what else about, camo's one thing, and then certainly just...
Okay, so here is your high IQ moment. When talking about camouflage, what makes a pattern good? People select camo for various reasons, and from my observation, many of these are non-scientific reasons. The reality is that as humans, we buy into brands, what other people are wearing, and have a bent toward just following the crowd. We become loyal to brands for one reason or another, but most of the established camo patterns are by admission made for human eyes, not deer eyes. So as high IQ hunters, we need to start looking through a deer's eyes to select good camo patterns. One thing to think about is their ability to create a 3D appearance, not a 2D or a flat appearance. The only way to do this is to have large areas of various contrasting colors that give the appearance of depth so deer look right through you. This is something to think about as you start analyzing current gear and buying new hunting clothes. And do you know your deer IQ? Do you think you're deer smart? Why don't you take our new and enhanced deer IQ test and find out? Different than our fun test last year, this is an in-depth, comprehensive assessment that reveals your strengths, weaknesses, and exactly where to focus to see the biggest results in the woods. It's the only tool out there designed by an educator that can tell you this vital information and is specifically made for those serious about improving as a deer hunter. Check that out, link below, and join the growing group of hunters who have already seen the big benefit of taking it and finding out their true deer IQ. All right, and now let's get back to the podcast.
going on, we talked about lights because they can't see red as well.
This is a
another point
one.
of contention, but something that you and I agree on, at least, that we practice.
Yeah, and I've argued with guys about this, and I think it's just really if you look at it real logically, okay, so deer can see white light 18 times brighter than us. And we also know from science, if you look at their cones, they see blue and yellow. They do not have a cone for red. So they cannot see red light. They physically cannot see it. And so if you're going in and out of your stand to hunt or whatever, and you're using white light, that is 18 times brighter than it is to us, to them. So we're basically really telegraphing that something is in their environment. And some people will argue, well, there's lights in the roads and houses, and they see lights, Well, it's not in their bedroom, The argument that I make is, well, if they can't see one, but they can see one 18 times brighter, what would you rather use? One that they can't see or one they definitely see very brightly? And I've had a lot of circumstances, especially here in Michigan, when, I get down or something, I haven't turned a light on yet, and I can hear some deer around. You turn on the red light, you can shine it in their eyes, and they have no clue that a light is on them. You can see it bouncing off their tapetum. They cannot detect it. As soon as you flip it to white, they snort and are out of there, right? So at some point, they associate white with humans, and the more you use white, they're going to start associating that. So I think it's really clear, and you can get really bright red lights pretty cheap that you can see really well with, but they cannot see at all. So it's safe. You can get up. You can set up in your tree and not have to be trying to do it in the dark or having a white light bouncing all over the place. And also, we don't see it quite as well as the other colors either. So if you're hunting on public land, I notice this a lot. Guys are coming and going with white lights. I can see them half mile away. I know exactly where they're going. I know when they come and go because they have this white light. If that's red, you're not being as transparent with where you're hunting because even the human can't see that a long distance as well.
Sure.
So there's a couple great reasons to use red there. The biggest being the deer just can't see it,
Yeah. And, that's why I do it is just if you have to pick, I'd rather pick the one that minimizes my physical presence or impact to other hunters, to deer, to squirrels, to raccoons, whatever. I just want to be as silent and stealthy, or as stealthy as possible, minimal intrusion. Man, what else do you think is applicable? I mean, there's a lot with vision, like movement and stand, how much we move, drawing a bow, certainly, like we're both big archers.
Well, yeah.
What do you think are some takeaways there?
Well, we talked about, this, and the idea that deer can see basically in slow motion. Like, I don't know if you can call it slow motion, but they basically are seeing about...
They can process
light
information 4 times faster than we can.
They process 4 times faster. It's called flicker fusion rate. And so if we were to do that, it would be like slowing down a projector 4 times. And things just tick. You can just see all the frames, right? And so if that's how they process visual information, it means, I'm not going to get away with much motion if they're alert at least. And we can talk about this too, like at certain times you can and can't, but that motion, you really think about that. And there's a lot of application to that. You talked about drawing a bow, right? Like, and you said it pretty good, so I'll let you go into that, but, the heat of the moment, what's your draw weight set at? Or when do you set your draw weight?
So I hunt, I used to set it in the summer, and so I'd always shoot my maximum draw weight. Well, there was one year where it was like I went to draw on a deer, I'd been sitting out in the cold, and I had to work to pull that bow back. And basically from that day forward, I barely got it back. Where in the summer, easy. So now my hunting weight, which is my just bow weight in general, is almost always 5 to 10 pounds less than. It's like I want my bow to be. I want to be able to draw my bow in the worst case condition as easy as possible, and that could be the difference of fighting it back or just like a really subtle. Like this is my goal, is just to hold it and have like a really smooth slow and bring up. And it's just like, it's not as, it's more comfortable. I've found, sure, you're losing a touch of arrow speed, but I've never, I don't shoot 60 yards, 50 yards, 40 yards. Like I'm shooting deer 30 and in, and at that point you're really splitting hairs in terms of, impact and sound and movement, all that stuff. Because actually I think what you guys talked about is like deer might be able to see the arrow move, like it could be that good where they're actually picking out and starting to drop. But I guess back to shooting is like, little things on stand, those little impacts I feel like to a deer are just amplified, right? We're used to, humans, you're basically, if you can't see their face, that they can't see you. And I'm probably guilty of this, of like, well, the deer's looking kind of away from me-ish, so it's probably not able to see me as well, when the reality is they can still pick out movement just as good, even though you might be in their quote unquote peripheral. And that's where their eye's very different, right? Of what you guys talked about. So making little movements or kind of knowing when to make movements. I mean, sometimes as hunters, it's like you might have a buck charge in. If you don't grab your bow now and turn, right. Sometimes you got to jump on that stuff, but man, when a deer's there, like being careful and really, picking apart your movements. So even like how you structure your gear and stand, I mean, that in theory could have some pretty important applications as far as how you're moving, how much you're reaching.
Yeah, just minimizing the movements. Like what can you do in preparation and while on stand to minimize your movement? Because why move more than you have to? And some of that is, I think sometimes it's hard to get into the mode. Like we operate on such a quick schedule, fast-paced world, and then we get out in the woods. We got to slow down to the pace of the woods, and the outdoors. But yeah, like if a deer can see basically in 4 times slow motion, first of all, the bow thing, why make yourself do any more movement than just pull that thing straight back? And I read this, I wish I could give credit, but I read this recently in an article. The guy was saying, if you can't, at 20 yards, put up a pie plate, hold your bow on it, put the sight on it, and then draw back while keeping your sight on the pie plate, then it's probably too much weight for you. And yeah, can you do that in the winter, under extreme condition with a bunch of clothes on where your muscles are been sitting not warm for several hours, so you start backing that poundage off that allows you to do that and just minimize that movement, right? So that's one thing, just the slow motion thing there as well. So there's a lot of areas, but just talking about this chart real quick here, I drew it, so I might as well talk about it. But this is showing low light conditions, and this just kind of shows the deer is the yellow. And under low light conditions, human is red. We don't see very well color in low light conditions. It's more it trends more toward black and white, to be honest with you. The rods start taking over. But this, and again, this is my drawing of it, but it's pretty close as far as the magnitude that deer, how much more light they can pick up than we can. And notice that it goes into the UV, but it doesn't get into the red, and that's where the red light comes in, and we do pick that up if it's bright enough. We do pick that up. We can see that, but they physically just can't. And so that really brings that out. And then another application that people talk about and ask about is the trail cameras with infrared, right? Like, I think deer, I see this all the time. I think deer are seeing the infrared flash. Okay, so just as real simple science is, here's red, they can't see that. They can't see anything below that. And infrared is below that as far as the frequency. And so there is no physical way they can see an infrared flash if it truly is infrared. Now, is the company, are they actually infrared? I don't know. But if it is infrared, there's no way they can see it. Even just red itself, they wouldn't see. We'd be able to see it. They wouldn't be able to. So that's just something to throw in there. So if guys think that their infrared trail camera is deer are picking it up, it is not the flash. It is something else. Does it make noise? Did they leave scent when they put it up or were in there last time? Stuff like that you need to start looking at with the realities of the science of deer vision. So that's quite a bit, I guess, to think about when it comes to deer vision and just what we can do differently, how we should think about it. And I think the takeaway, we have something to give guys to help with this. So this is, science and related to that. We don't have a guide for deer vision, but we have one for scent control, which is a huge one. There's a free guide for that. You can go ahead and download that because that's another of the senses that you just have to be super vigilant with and careful with, and that can make a huge difference. Just like these little things with vision, little things with your scent, and then we'll do an episode where we talk about sound and a bunch of sound control stuff, which is another really super important part. But you can download that free scent control regimen, and I've been using it for quite a few years and kind of just tweaking and perfecting it, and it makes a huge difference. I'll just say that. It makes a huge difference. So guys can check that out.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, if nothing else, think about, how you move in a stand. I feel like it probably doesn't get as much credit as it deserves when we do spend so much time on scent control regimen, stand placement. We kind of microanalyze these other areas. It's like, it's worth microanalyzing. Hey, how am I actually moving through the woods? How am I moving in stand? How am I drawing my bow or aiming my gun or whatever? Because it has, a lot of big implications.
And one little thing could kill you.
In the right moment. It's like if we're really trying to, get to be better hunters and dive in, especially when you talk about like mature buck hunting, it's like these little things add up, right? Yep. And so spend some time thinking about how it could impact you and how you might be able to improve. And I think you posted that around May and June of last year. So if like you're scrolling back, it'd be with the episodes were with Dr. Carl Miller.
I'll link him.
Really interesting. Great listen. Yeah.
I'll link him. So the takeaways are download the scent control regimen. And I'll say this too, our summer workshop. So we have a workshop this summer. We're going to go through stuff like this for 2 days and really get deep into really applicable stuff of how you can be more consistent on the top deer where you hunt, which is the theme this year. We really dig into that pyramid that we talked about before of the 6 things you got to move through to do that consistently. So that's this summer. Check that out. If you sign up now, if you actually email me at adam@deeriq.com, I'll give you a code for $100 off. So that's if you do it very soon. But that's this summer, and that'll just be a very beneficial thing for anybody really who wants to just take it up a level. So, well, thanks, Mark.
For sure.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Okay, so here are your high IQ takeaways and challenges real quick. Start seeing hunting through the eyes of a whitetail. Start trying to put yourself behind their eyeballs in all hunting situations, not just your eyeballs. That's a tough one, but will really help you. Okay, and next time we continue deep into deer science and dig further into deer hearing and very important implications and applications you'll really want to start considering. You won't want to miss that high IQ episode, and I'll see you then.